Welcome back. The next item on the agenda, we're starting section 4. And the next item on the agenda is CR 39 with Lars Hagen. There you go. There you go. Okay, we need to quiet the room down. We're going to get started. The next item is CR 39.
So CR 39, we're working towards transitioning the chlorine sizing away from one number for all performance-based criteria. Getting feedback here. Here's the proposed summary for CR 39. All chlorine dosing and generating equipment shall be designed with a capacity. Sorry, it's jumping slides on me. All chlorine dosing generating equipment shall be designed with a capacity to provide and maintain free available chlorine levels as specified in section 573112, which are a minimum fact concentration of 1, 2, or 3 parts per million based on the aquatic venue type. The engineer shall address the following factors when sizing the feeder's equipment: pool surface area, pool volume, type, indoor, outdoor, and other factors that affect the chlorine demand. As Doug mentioned this morning, chlorinator sizing work group was created in April of this year to develop guidance and supporting data to enable appropriate sizing of feeders. Part of our task was to collect data to develop a rate code, determine a suitable safety factor, specify time frame for dosing. Due to time constraints, the work group was not able to gather in or analyze data from enough pools in sufficient detail to address. I'm sorry, guys. To address. Can we back up? Okay, sorry. To address different environmental and operational conditions as specified in the research agenda. Based on the available data, the subcommittee's preliminary analysis indicates that there is not a direct correlation between actual chlorine consumption versus aquatic venue volume, and that other factors should be included in the engineering design dosing capacity of chlorine per day. The preliminary analysis indicates that currently there is not an ideal dosage rate formula. The analysis also indicates that current MAHC code requires a higher feeder capacity than necessary to meet demand in some cases, and in a lot of cases also may not require enough chlorine capacity. One of the key precepts of the MAHC is that it be performance-based where applicable. CR 39 addresses that goal. In the subcommittee's analysis, prescriptive dosing levels were considered, but revised dosing levels based on the available data could not be defended, nor did the data support the existing rates. To better design chlorine dosing, I don't know why we're jumping here, guys, sorry. To better design chlorine dosing capacity for aquatic venues and revise the MAHC accordingly, a formal scientifically gathered data collection effort and analysis effort is recommended. The CMAHC intends to pursue this recommendation. The subcommittee is preparing an interim progress report which will be passed on to the CMAHC and ultimately posted on the CMAHC website. The MAHC and the NSF recommendations and the reported usage, I don't know what's going on. The MAHC and NSF ANSI recommendations and the reported usage are divided by... Sorry, guys.
Where were you at? Right here?
The last slide. Yeah.
This one?
Yep.
Just do it this way right here and then manually click on them.
Can you go to the next one? Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that, guys. The MAC and the NSF recommendations and the reported usage are divided by the reported usage to provide a normalized value for plotting. For example, if we have a pool that's using 10 pounds typical chlorine a day, we take 10, divide it by 10, it's 100%. If the MAC requirement or suggestion was 50 pounds, we'd divide 50 by 10 and we'd have 500% or 5 times. The current MAC does not have a dosage recommendation for outdoor stabilized pools. A plotted value of 0% indicates the aquatic venue falls into this category. So if you look, the light blue on the bottom, that's the ones that aren't covered because they're stabilized. Samples are sorting in ascending order by the NSF ANSI normalized value, which is the dark blue line. Currently, both the MAC and the NSF code recommend chlorine dosage strictly by the volume of the aquatic venue. NSF has one rate, which falls kind of in between the MAC rates, and the MAC has 2 rates, which is why values are both above and below the NSF line. The NSF and MAC code do not always provide adequate safety margin or sanitation on some aquatic venues. For example, the first pool on the far left there, 84% of the typically daily usage is recommended by the NSF code. The MAC and the NSF codes recommend an excessive amount of sanitation dosing capacity on many venues. If you look on the far right, that last pool, you can see it's 2,800% and 2,350% respectively. Pool volume does not correlate to chlorine demand. Other factors are involved. If pool volume did correlate, we'd see a nice straight line going across instead of this slope like this. A better method for determining dosage rates is warranted. Thank you.
TRC.
Well, as you can see, there is no particular agreement yet, seeing that there is a committee still working for chlorinator sizing. There is a work group in that. Work is still being done. We do not have the TRC does not have a recommendation for this particular change request at this time. And we certainly will keep following what the work group is doing, and we encourage that work to continue. That's all I have.
Just a note that CR40 also addresses this chlorinator sizing, a little different aspect of it, but it's really tied into what the end result of CR39 is going to be. So the issue is you're going to have CR40 right now as it stands out there to vote on. So what we're proposing is to discuss that with a submitter, and because it's directly tied into the results of the work group, to rescind CR40 and just have 39 to vote on, because it'll be captured, the information in 40 that's addressed once the work group finishes up and the proposal goes forward will be addressed in CR39. And it still, even as the proposed wording right now in the CR39 that you're going to be voting on, even without the work group going forward, it'll still be addressed in this performance-based approach.
So the next item is CR44.
Sorry, I'm getting my bearings here. Yeah, so this change request, number 44, essentially said that the annex wording was going to change to minimum flow rate calculation for secondary disinfection systems. It also discussed, I believe, the location of the secondary disinfectant, where that should be treated in the whole the recirculation system, whether or not it's pre-filtration, post-filtration, before chemical injection or after chemical injection. And there is some evidence provided stating that there's the effectiveness of the sanitizer. If that's provided before the UV system, then it becomes less effective. And the technical review committee did not agree with the proposed change to the minimum flow rate calculation, and so therefore it recommended that this change request not be accepted.
Next item is CR 48, also by the Technical Review Committee.
So CR 48 had lobbied for the deletion of the water replenishment requirements in the Model Aquatic Health Code. There was a statement for 15 liters per bather per day requirement, and the author had lobbied that, especially in drought areas, that this requirement was overly burdensome, and the Technical Review Committee did not recommended that this change not be implemented, stating that it seemed like the language from the Model Aquatic Health Code, the first edition, was interpreted incorrectly by the submitter. There was language that says the discharge is up to 15 liters per bather per day, and it's therefore not a requirement that level be met. We discussed that for the majority of facilities, the 15 liters per bather per day is actually in all likelihood met because of water loss due to splash out, evaporation, backwash losses, and similar events.
And then the last one from this section is CR 50.
Okay. CR. Is he here? Oh, good. All right,
Richard?
great. I thought you were here. That's up here. Other side.
Well, I'm Rich Cassiope. I'm from the Center for Public and Lodging Pool Study. I'm an old trial lawyer. I couldn't even say hello, Judge, in 5 minutes, so I'll do my best. Basically, what I'm recommending and proposing, which has been rejected, is that the code states that pools have to be clean. Going back to the American Public Health Association's first attempt of a code in 1920, they required that pools be vacuumed and removed of debris. There's nothing in here that says that. Pool hygiene, which was first studied in 1912, same year the first pool cleaner was invented, stated that it's pool hygiene, and pool hygiene has filtration, sanitation, and what I say, cleaning. The food code, which this was partially based on, says before you can sanitize a surface in any type of a food restaurant or facility, you have to first clean it so the sanitizer can work. So basically all I'm saying is that, and advocating, is that we have a standard to clean the pool. And the best practices would be the most modern, up-to-date, state-of-the-art products. That's basically it. Thank you.
Technical Review Committee.
Okay, the CR made several additions of specific sections to the design and construction standards of the code. And the existing code, section 5.6.10.61 has a cleaning section that it requires cleaning, and that's in the operation and use portion of the code. The particular sections, although we certainly agree that pools are required to be cleaned, this particular section adds requirements that and refers to the National Sanitation Foundation, NSF International, which we're not aware that has those requirements yet in the NSF Standard 50. So the TRC does not recommend that we adopt this particular report change at this time. But when standards are developed for cleaning equipment, we need to revisit the topic, and we also would like to see we realize it's been in the public health for years and years. I don't know if there's any way to quantify what the effects of cleaning the pool, but I'm sure there are. How do we do that? I don't know, but that's another way we would want to just gather supporting evidence for what's the cost and health benefits to this. So we need to revisit. That's really our goal, but not at this particular way. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I'll open the floor up now for comment. Let's line up on this side of the room, and then we'll have one line coming up to use the microphone. So we'll open the floor for comment. Yes.
We did receive one submitted public comment to the website, posted on the website in regard to CR 50, and I'll read it. It's, we support the TRC's recommendation for disapproval. Listing a non-finalized standard is a good reason, but additionally asking for only products certified by one organization is inappropriate for a national model code. The standard itself can come from one organization, but the certification of products to that standard should be allowed by approved agencies or third parties that have proved through ISO 17065 capable of providing said certification. That was submitted by Josh Jacobs from UL Labs.
Mr. Mock?
Oh, let me see. I can leave this down. Leave it down.
Thanks, Doug. Jim Mock, Ecolab. We believe that the language in CR 39, the interim language, appears to be self-policing on the part of the manufacturer or the manufacturer's representative or the engineer, allowing some engineers on these various properties to determine the proper system could present a challenge because of their own independent personal skills, their knowledge, or their background. We believe that the proposed language should refer to a minimum standard, and there is enough data that we can at least get to a baseline of the minimum amount of chlorine that would be necessary for a given volume body of water.
Michael Beach, CDC, CR 48. I just wanted to clarify on the water replenishment part that the language that was put in there is actually, it's in section 4. It's a design thing, so it's asking, it's really talking about we don't want to get rid of this much water, but it's solving it by eliminating the design ramification to begin with, rather than the policy, which is in Section 5. So I just wanted to clarify it's a design part, and it really is really referring to a policy type change.
Bob Vincent, Florida, CR 39. I'm interested in seeing that the pools that are operated on Labor Day, 4th of July, Memorial Day, and all those other hot days and sweaty days and dirty days out there have sufficient chlorine, and that's why this design criteria is in the code. And granted, there are other days, other weekdays when there's very low bathing loads and there's lots of fewer people there that you don't need near that much chlorine. But what's really exciting about this work group is you're looking at real life data, and I look forward to the analysis of that. I would caution you, though, to normalize the amounts of chlorine that are on the graph. I mean, if you think about airline pilots flying over Colorado, you know, the average height of the mountains is 8,000 feet, and you don't want to fly at 9,000 over Colorado. You want to look for the worst case scenario and then build in a safety factor.
Are there any other floor comments? I'll ask our online team to present what's happened. Do we have any comments online?
We'll just do it. Only one comment from online, and it's regarding CR50, the pool vacuum cleaning. And it's more of a question or clarification for either the TRC or the submitter. Second, I went blank. How 4.76.2 is written, is it requiring, this would be the modification, is it requiring each facility to own and operate both a robotic pool cleaner and a handheld vacuum? Not sure we know the answer to that question, but that was something that was posed out there.
Thank you. Are there any more comments from the floor? Go ahead, Doug.
I'm going to reverse to. Sorry, I've got to get the glasses I can actually see. Okay. Just to clarify a couple points on CR 39. Go back to this. Just to look, the committee, you'll see that the rates, we talked about performance-based, and these are the factors, criteria that the work group identified that could affect the amount of chlorine consumption. So this is what was put in from a performance-based. And here what Jim Mock had indicated, one of the ideas of the committee was to have an either-or type, have an option of here's X number of pounds per, a prescriptive for certain categories, or you can do the more fine-tuned dealing with a performance space when you know and you have data on these or have knowledge to incorporate these. So the desire was to have both of those, but as Lars had indicated, for having the prescriptive dosing in there, didn't feel based on the data that was there that we could defend it, that it was a good number or propose an additional number. We'd like to get there and maybe look at, instead of one size fits all, are there numbers for indoor versus outdoor, a wading pool or a pool with aeration on that. So this was just put forward, not saying that this is not going to be incorporated in the future as additional data was collected, but here's what we could be comfortable with as far as the subcommittee report right now on what could be put forward. But realize that without the, I think that having the performance-based is a good idea, but as some have pointed out, not having some baseline for those that aren't familiar with it could be an issue. But how do you? We didn't want to continue on with having a number that was not defensible, and that was, as I indicated before in the introductory comments, we had. When we had developing this language in the initial module, we had comments too low, too high. We revised it based on comments, had additional second round of comments, still had problems with the numbers, too high, too low, and that's why I said we convened the work group. So there's consideration and understanding of the desire to have some thresholds, but didn't want to continue on with putting a number in that then was going to be, codified in there that we couldn't necessarily fall back on as saying it's defensible. So it is a bit of a dilemma, and we wish we could have come forward today with having all the data that we wanted to present to you, but the question is going to be, too, when you're voting, is it going to continue on with what we have, or do we have some middle ground as we transition into new? So just wanted to kind of explain where we're at and why we've got what we've got here.
Any other floor comments on Section 4? Moving on to Section 5, CR 51, Mr. Kelly.
Change request 51, the submitter is John Kelly, and it places limits on the use of wing walls, not at a zero depth entry, not next to 5 feet of water, and in areas where the depths differ by more than 6 inches. So again, here we're looking at it from a drowning prevention standpoint, and the language we specifically added was wing walls shall not be used immediately adjacent to zero depth entry, immediately adjacent to water depths greater than 5 feet, or to separate sections of a pool with water depths varying by more than 6 inches. And when we look at these wing walls, they've become used quite extensively in pools now. And the wing walls create large physical obstructions, limiting the visibility into a swimming pool, the access in and out of swimming pools, and can create abrupt depth changes across the wing wall, which can allow non-swimmers to quickly and quietly access water that's too deep. Generally, these young non-swimmers traditionally have been separated by barriers or distance from deeper water. Again, when we look at the data on drowning incidents, we see these 1 to 5, 3-year-olds in particular, but all the children 3 to 10, that the rates appear for drowning in swimming pools appear to be going up over time. This is an example of one that we saw submitted to us, in which they have the zero depth entry immediately adjacent to the lap lanes. So as there it is. So as the kids are playing on this side of the zero depth entry, they're just 8 inches away from 5 feet of water. You can see, in the rendering by the architect there, you can see the kids playing on their equipment in the zero depth entry and the lap swimmers immediately adjacent to them. We raised this during design as we were doing the plan review and our concerns over it. Neither the owner nor the designer was particularly concerned about it at the time. As we got through and went out to do the initial construction inspection, at that point, once the owner actually saw the installed pool with water in it, he realized what our concern was and had the contractor at least put a railing down the middle to separate those two areas of the pool so those children couldn't so easily access the deeper water there. This is an example next to deep water, and again, we kind of showed this one earlier, where we got a wing wall coming down one side of the deep water there. And with this, obviously people could breach that wing wall, but the other part is it's limiting the lifeguard access to get a good visual into that deep water. Presumably we could have, with no restrictions on wing walls, we could have a wing wall on this other side, and we could have, a zero depth entry coming in this side with a wing wall. Without any kind of restrictions on wing walls, we really can limit the visibility into the pool, the access in and out of the deep water, and provide an easy means for those young children to end up in water that's too deep. This is another example. it's got a zero depth entry coming in next to lap lanes. This one, by design, had a wing wall down the middle with the railing on it to limit them from going over the wall. But then in the back corner of the zero depth entry, it had stairs, underwater stairs that transitioned into current channel, and then a wing wall separating that current channel from the toddler area of this pool. This one we did have a fatal drowning on. The child was seen, last seen playing in the zero depth entry area with a sibling before he was recovered from the current channel. It appeared likely, based on everything we looked at, that he either entered that current channel through those stairs connecting it to the current channel or over that wing wall attaching it to the current channel. I think when the technical review committee, based on what I could see, they were concerned about, how this would affect ramps and other points of entrance. It wasn't really our intent that this would prevent you from putting a ramp into a pool. In our language, it was more to separate sections of the pool, so a zero depth from a deep water, from a current channel. That was more the intent of what was intended. Points of entry like stairs or a ramp. It wasn't our intent to prevent wing walls used next to stairs or next to ramps.
TRC comments?
On this particular change request, the Technical Review Committee did not recommend approving the change in limitations proposed on the wing walls. Wing walls are necessary for larger multi-purpose pools and really pools of any nature. John mentioned the stairs, which are common within competition pools, just to terminate stairs into a vertical surface before it opens up into a larger lap area. But especially with indoor pools where there are a lot of different functions within the body of water, the wing walls are required to reconcile slopes. John mentioned the ramp. Certainly with the proposed provision to put a restriction on the ramp entry in the adjacent water depth of 6 inches, a ramp would either need to be fully a part of, have to just be with railings, fully part of a zero beach entry with the required landings, or completely removed from the pool, because even if you're a linear ramp, you're going to be adjacent to water that just by definition is going to be deeper than 6 inches. And it prohibit the ability for switchbacks and things like that. We addressed the issue of visibility and the TRC's position during our deliberations, that certainly wing walls can create an issue for visibility, but that is a topic for discussion, one, during design, and then two, during guard placements and prior to operation. We had recommended, certainly specific target and be open to targeted data on the issue at hand regarding wing walls and safety. But believe that there are a few jurisdictions that do put some limits and provisions on them right now. A couple states, if you've got a deck level gutter where the wing wall doesn't stick up a few inches above the water level, may require a railing. But the TRC had recommended not approving this change.
Thank you, Carl. The next item is CR 52 from Mr. Kelly.
Again, this is me, and we're looking at diving board changes requiring railings and stairs for all boards over 1 meter or higher. In the specific language we introduced here, we said diving boards or platforms greater than 1 meter in height shall be accessed by a stairway. The stair railing and diving board or platform guardrails shall be designed to prevent falls and extend past the pool edge. This was based on information we read out there in the industry and other people's observations as well, and we've reviewed this and looked online and found many incidents of injuries and multiple deaths associated with falls from ladders at 3 meter stands or boards. Many of the injuries or deaths could be eliminated through design changes to make the boards safer by removing the vertical ladder and replacing it with a stairway or improving the guardrails at the diving board. This is just a couple examples of some of the articles we found with a Florida boy. 5 died off falling off the diving board. We found one reference to a large $5 million jury verdict in relation to a fall from a 3-meter diving board. We see in the industry press and in the news, Tom Griffiths put out articles talking about this issue before and where have all the high dives gone. We've seen pools continue to remove the high dives from their pools because of the perceived risk with the high dives. Although most of the injuries aren't coming off the end of the board into the water, the injuries that is driving a lot of this is falls from the ladder onto the concrete below or from the board onto the concrete below. We got an article here from Waterloo in Iowa that I found where they had removed their high dives after they had multiple incidents one summer as well. Looking on the online, Paddock Industries on their website in the info center provides guidance that says should a commercial pool have diving equipment, and their recommendation is only if a formal diving program's in place, and if so, diving equipment should only be used under the direct supervision of a certified diving instructor, and that 1 and 3 meter boards should never be used for recreation. I'm not going that far with what I'm recommending here. It appears to me the danger is on the ladder side of it, not the boards themselves when they're used. But this would be somewhat similar to how we do starting blocks. We require those to only be used under direct supervision. USA Diving, when we look at the guidance on their information that they provide their coaches, it says in theirs that familiarize the divers with the training equipment, teach the athletes how to climb up and down the ladders to the springboards. There's different ways you can climb a ladder. You can do it where you got 2 points of contact at every time, where you're alternating, moving your hands and feet at the same time. Or you can have 3 points of contact where you just move a hand and keep 2 feet and the other hand in contact. So there's different ways you can climb a ladder. There's safety. Obviously keeping more points of contact with the ladder is safer than keeping less points of contact. So, USA Diving recognizes the need to train their athletes on how to climb ladders. When we look at the industry as a whole, we see facility operators who keep the 3 meter boards, have no clear direction on how to make them safe for recreational use. We were looking online, and it appeared the city of Scottsdale here has some height and age restrictions they put on for the use of their 3 meter boards. University of North Carolina, it looks like they have waivers that they make people sign before they can use the 3 meter boards. And we checked with one of the manufacturers to see what kind of guidance they provide the operators and the designers as far as the proper use of these boards. And they said they don't provide an operations manual for their dive stands, and they make no age or height recommendations. So this leaves the operators and the designers with no clear guidance. This is a photo I took from an inspection I did this summer with a new 3 meter board. And on this particular design, they have the steps all just slightly offset of each other until you get to the top one, and then for some reason they've got a large gap. And on this one, after I'd come up on the board and was making some measurements to the water or whatever, and I went to step down off a board like a scared child might do. As I stepped backwards from that first step onto the second one, my leg went right through that hole, and I was in a position that I almost fell. So, with the ladders and no clear guidance on how these are constructed, we think these create the hazard. We think this, there was some discussion of revolution versus evolution. We think stairs to the top of a 3 meter board is a natural evolution given the injuries that are occurring. It's not revolutionary. We're not saying taking them out. We're not going as far as Paddock Industries saying they should never be used for recreation. We just think this is a natural evolution of boards to address a specific hazard, which is that vertical ladder to access the diving board.
TRC comments, please.
first step there. As you can see, this is an issue that needs to be addressed. The proposal to require diving platforms greater than 1 meter in height accessible by a stairway, and the stair railing and diving board or platform guardrails shall be designed to prevent falls and extend past the pool edge. They're appropriate suggestions. We, as a committee, are actually abstained from this one because it's kind of gone back and forth within the code. Originally, when a similar proposal was submitted during the public comment period prior to publishing the first edition, and the MAC committee disagreed at that time, indicating requiring only stairways would dramatically change the entire design of deck sizing. This probably is true. The MAC committee indicated that this needs to be brought up as a position statement. That position statement is not forthcoming yet. Part of the charge to the TRC was to determine if the proposed change is evolutionary rather than revolutionary. Parts of this are probably revolutionary, parts of it are evolutionary, and it's we do need to come up with some, as CMAHC, we need to come up with a position statement on this. It is, that particular gap, was that a missing tread? It was designed that way. I hadn't seen, coming just personally from Michigan, I have seen so few 3-meter boards in the last 10, 15 years that that's not something we've looked at all. The ladders are definitely not designed for young children, and the spacing is not designed for them, and there should be some definite guidelines. We would certainly agree with there needs to be definite guidelines set forth, and also it would be nice if the industry would be part of that discussion. We didn't have as much luck with the TRC getting an industry response to our questions. I'm glad John got something, so that's a start. We would certainly like to see how the industry would want to answer or go for this. So, again, we're not making any recommendations at this point in time. We do realize that these are problems to children using 3-meter boards, and it's problems with the ladders and not necessarily with the boards or the diving depths. And we also need to be able to figure out how to prevent, or what that really looks like. How do you prevent children from falling off the side of a board, and what does that look like? Can we make suggestions to the industry? I don't know. So that's things we need to do. But in any case, we're calling, CMAHC should be developing a position statement.
Thank you. The next item is CR 56, 58, 99, and 156. And the Technical Review Committee is going to present those items.
All right. The TRC chose to put this grouping of change requests together. They're all related to complete deletion of sections that are perceived as administrative guidance or regulating the regulator, including operating permits in CR 56, inspections in CR 58, waiver language to speaking to HJ and CR 99 and AHA inspections in CR 156. A lot of this was discussed we talked about this at CR4 this morning about separating out, surgically removing wording so that the code could be easily adaptable by some jurisdictions. And that's going to be the issue that we're dealing with right now. As we recommended for item for CR4, when it will be up to the local jurisdiction, whoever is adopting the MAC by reference, to be able to pick and choose which sections they want to use, but the terminology still needs to remain in the MAC as written at this time. We would leave it up to the HJ to figure out how to surgically remove inappropriate code section from the MAC. This would probably be a point for discussion as we go forward. It perhaps could be done better in 2 years from now as the public health community starts to make more, as we figure out, well, there's so many differences in how local jurisdictions handle codes that we just have to figure out the direction that we need to go that would be appropriate for the MAC for the future.
Thank you. We'll open the floor for comment on Section 5.
Michael Beach, CDC, just talking about the diving board situation. I think what I'd like to kind of point out that these are, I think, good examples of where, depending on how membership goes in that, we need to think about, from a member comment standpoint, that we put in place a group, an ad hoc committee or whatever, to discuss this over the next 2 years and come up with some reasonable alternatives if it's not passed. Because I think some of the issues here are pretty clear that we can improve things. And if it's not passed, let's think about how we're going to bring people together to come up with changes to this. How would we do this if it's not through stairs or that? I mean, it keeps coming up where there are clear issues involved. And so we might want to think, I think Paul was calling it a position statement, or basically a revised change request that's submitted next time, and we task the group with doing that. That's a potential for comment that could be put forward.
Jennifer, and then Carl.
Jennifer Hatfield with J. Hatfield and Associates, and I wanted to highlight, though, with regard to CR 50, the diving board proposal, that the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code in Section 402.14 deals with fall protection guards, and the proposal would be, if it were to pass, would be inconsistent with that. And in the International Pool Code, it requires the guards when the springboards are located at a height greater than 5 feet, which is about 1.5 meters. So if right now the code's the max says 2 meters, so at least they're inconsistent still, but the pool code's more stringent, and then if you change it to 1 meter, you're going to have one code say 2, one say 1. It's just going to be a problem. The same thing with regard to the stairways. If you look at 402.13 of the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code, it addresses stairways, ladders. And I just want to, that language actually came from the ANSI APSP ICC Standard 1 for public pools that has diving requirements that have been vetted by the committee for some time. I mean, that standard has been around since the 80s, I think, if not before. And I would just encourage, if you guys are going to look at, if you have concerns with what is already in the standards in the International Pool Code, maybe we could look to some of those people who sat on that group to work with you guys in a work group on the MAC, because you have people that have been involved with competition, like Don Lees that deals with FINA, that sit on those standards and groups. We've got some of the diving board manufacturers. I would look to them to see if there is a concern. But I just wanted to make a point that some of this has been in other standards and codes. Thank you.
I failed to make one additional point to the TRC's discussions on the wing wall issue, and that was, we were tasked with each of these items, if it was applicable, to look at it from an economic standpoint as well, and specifically with indoor pools. If you were to take away the wing walls that are there to reconcile slopes, between different areas within the pool, that pool obviously opens up and expands exponentially, at a cost of $400 or $500 a square foot for natatorium construction. That first dollar cost gets prohibitively expensive, as well as the operational cost, because your pool grew by 30, 40, 50%. So I just want to make that point as well, that was discussed internally.
Michael Beach, CDC, the grouped AHJ type language. I think what we've heard from other people is that some of that language actually people want to retain in there because they don't see it as AHJ language and they prefer to have it in the code. So we need to think about what's AHJ in real speaking to the regulator versus not speaking to the regulator and separate those. I would say that CR 99 is very specific. It's waiver-specific language that is clearly speaking just to the authority having jurisdiction, and I'd certainly think that that's one that could be removed outright and moved to an administrative section, as we've heard suggested.
Any other floor comments? Now go to our online comments.
Okay, CR 51, place limits on the use of the wing walls. Comment that came in: visibility concerns can be remediated by proper placement of lifeguards/attendants, which should be evaluated during the plan review process. CR 52, regarding the diving board changing railings and stairs for the boards. Appears to be more of a CPSC request versus a MAC requirement. And what we can't tease out from that comment is whether that's a CPS request for just specifically the design of that particular stair design for that diving board, or something in general, as in if this is a CPSB purview. We could see clarification on that. Stainless steel handrails on the ladders and guardrails of diving boards can become slick when wet. Maybe have language requiring non-slick surfaces on railings. Do we know what caused those falls from ladders? Has anyone looked at the use of ladder cages for diving board ladders? Some more insight into that. Another comment: recommends trying and collecting data on what the major specific causes are of falls from ladders, diving boards, whether it's slipped, misstepped, etc. Kind of gets to some of the comments about the unknowns about these diving boards. And nothing for the final CR.
Thank you. Any other floor comments on Section 5? Seeing none, we'll move on to Section 6, CR 63. Doug Sackett.
For CR 63, what we're looking for is requiring ground fault circuit interrupters on branch circuits for underwater lights that are operating over 15 volts. And this is going to be in the operational section of the code, so it's a Section 5 item. So I'll go back. So what we're trying to, went the wrong way here. Trying to address is there's actually a void in the code. If new construction, National Electrical Code is there, the standard would call for these appropriate protections, GFCI protections on those branch circuits. But there's existing pools that may have predated NEC requirements or just plain missing, weren't in compliance with underwater lights operating at 120 volt systems. It's clearly an electrical hazard for those using it should something go wrong. So we wanted to correct that void and absence of that and put it in the operational section. So if you do encounter that situation, have the opportunity, the ability to require appropriate protection on that circuit.
TRC comments?
This one's pretty straightforward. The TRC did recommend with the author on this one. It viewed it could be a serious public health and life safety issue. CRC did express potential concern for some authorities having jurisdiction to test and or approve repairs, as this may overlap electrical inspections purview.
Thank you. Next one is TR 74. I'm guessing that's going to be you. You weren't moving very fast.
So in summary, CR 74 dealt with decks, looking to strike a provision that stated, deck areas shall be free from standing water. And it was argued that statement alone was overly broad. And it further went on to state that the overly broad definition of standing water the elimination of all standing water from concrete surfaces is unrealistic. If text is kept, request the addition of a depth of standing water and or size. And so TRC, we ended up recommending that this change get rejected. Unfortunately, there wasn't a specific set of parameters to what that standing water might be. I believe there's other jurisdictions that state that it's minimum of a certain depth, lasts for 10, 20 minutes or so before it evaporates. But the TRC here felt that removing the standing water from the pool deck is critical from a life safety perspective, but also for health reasons as well. Within the current version of the MAC, there are minimum slope requirements for different types of deck surfaces, whether it's broom finished concrete, tile, or other surfaces, just to allow for positive drainage.
Next item is CR 75 and 75A from the TRC.
The submitter of this change request recommends, or actually is proposing language to delete the requirement for continuous water treatment using recirculation system to operate 24 hours a day. And then 75A is a modification that the TRC has worked on to adjust that. Now that CR 75 basically strikes out the word 24 hours a day. So basically, it allows, the way this has been proposed, it would allow a pool to simply shut off their pump and filter for unspecified periods of the day. And it essentially removes continuous water treatment. This does conflict with the best practice and portions of the code that are in place now, and the committee did not support this change. However, we did come up with a modified version to try to get to the point that this is on 75A. Let's see if that's down here. 75A. Basically, the modified change would say all components shall be kept in continuous operation 24 hours per day to ensure all required water quality parameters are met. That gets to the point, but it still keeps the system operating. And there would be, I don't know of any, we have ways of being able to lower the flow rates, but not to turn it off during periods of time is just in conflict with what we feel the code is and the way it should be going. So our recommendation would be to accept 75A as the alternate language over CR 75.
Thank you. Next item is CR 77.
Okay, CR 77. I believe we're going to hear from this presenter during the main part of the conference is for CR 77, which would set water quality parameters that, if met, would allow operator to reduce halogen levels down to 0.5 part per million and 0.3 part per million. Are we going to hear from them or not? No. There was some discussion. I thought he was no. Okay, it's something. I was thinking of something that came. Right now, the proposer brings up the change that they would require would be if an aquatic venue that maintains a turbidity level in the filtrate are less of equivalent than 0.2 apart per 0.2 NTU may operate with a free chlorine residual of no less than 0.5 part per million if able to maintain an ORP value of no less than 700 millivolts and 0.3 part per million if able to consistently maintain over ORP value no less than 770 millivolts and a pH of no more than 7.3. We did have some discussions with this author, and the author brought up points that the pools, some pools are run in Europe and Canada, definitely are different than they are run in the United States. The change request provides, there's a lot of evidence submitted in the change request that would justify the lowering of the disinfection levels for those particular jurisdictions, but it doesn't fully explain how in other parts of the code it was able to do that. And we really didn't see scientific data, but this is the differences between pools here in the U.S. and pools in the European Union and Canada. We have to have other requirements in addition to maintain the minimum ORP and maximum turbidity. The change request is basically incomplete because it didn't adequately provide how the minimum ORP and maximum turbidity levels are sufficient and how those levels would protect the public health. Right now in the U.S., the EPA regulations regulates the level of disinfectant used in pools, and the minimum level is 1 part per million for systems that are using chlorine alone as a disinfectant in the presence of a stabilizer. And then there's here's a particular label that indicates stabilized pool should maintain a residual of 1 to 1.5 parts per million available chlorine. So basically we, as a committee, I lost my page here. We've delayed this decision because we do need further study it. We just simply don't have enough information to really make a final decision at this point in time.
Thank you. We'll now open the floor for Section 6 comments. Jennifer, come on up.
Jennifer Hatfield. I want to, and with regard to CR 63, I want to bring your attention to the National Electrical Code language. I very much support what Doug's trying to do here with electrical safety, but I do, as you probably can tell by today, I reference different standards and codes because I don't want us to reinvent the wheel. When we have other standards and codes to reference. And when it comes to anything with regard to electrical safety, the NEC, I think, is the Bible on that. And the NEC has actually eliminated the 15-volt requirement in place of what they call the low voltage contact limit. It's defined in section 680.2 of the NEC. They did that because if you leave in the 15 volt, it eliminates a lot of new low voltage lighting technologies, okay? So there's a lot of things out there, as we know, when it comes to lighting technologies. And so I would just suggest in this case, I mean, I really encourage with the MAC that when we're dealing with electrical, we just reference NEC. But I understand where Doug's coming from in this case with it being, we're looking at existing pools, not new construction. We need to have something in there. I would just say let's tweak it a little to reference the low voltage contact limit instead of the 15 volts, so we're consistent with the National Electrical Code. That was a change, I think, in the 2011 edition of the NEC. That's it.
Okay, Richard Falk. First on CR 75, which is the 24-hour requirement for circulation in the pool. So these standards aren't just for large public pools and such, or commercial installations. These are also for your smaller hotel pools and things of that nature too. So, and those tend to approach even closer to not quite residential, but they don't necessarily have high beta load. So the standards also, MAHC, are supposed to be performance-based. So, saying the pump's got to run a particular period of time and so on doesn't make as much sense. If the standards are being made because the beta load isn't particularly that high, they've got a single-speed pump, they haven't gone to two-speed yet, they haven't upgraded or have a variable speed or whatever. So they have it off at night or part of the night to save some energy, and then they have it on at least during the day when the bathers are there and so on, so chlorine is circulated and such. As long as it's meeting filtration, turbidity, or whatever other requirements are needed, I just don't see the point of that. So that's one.
You only get one. You can get.
Oh, you only get one at a time. How do you do the other one? Come back.
Yep.
Got it. Thanks.
Dr. Beach next, and then Lars. If we're going to have one line, let's do it on this side of the room.
Here. Okay, thanks. I'll only do one, and I'll get back in line. To the same one. 7575A, Michael Beach, CDC. I just think I wanted to point out that as we're talking about systems that have secondary disinfection, ozone, UV, and that sort of thing, are put on there in increased risk facilities because of crypto inactivation, if you shut it off for the night, you don't inactivate crypto because you're not flowing it through there. And so we really need to see that continue. The MAC does include the use of variable speed pumps, and you can ramp down 25%, but you still have to meet the minimum flow rates as outlined in the MAC as what's being required. So I'd like us to think about that.
Lars?
Lars Sagan, Autopilot. I'm an electrical engineer, and I would like to point out I agree with Jennifer on 63. In this, there was no reference whether it was 15 volts AC or DC. Makes a big difference with a GFI or not a GFI transformer technology versus non-transformer. So I would defer to the National Electric Code too.
John?
John Lynn, SeaWorld Parks and Entertainment. Referring to CR 75, would share with the group that we have been operating under, in state of Florida, under allowable, the code allows us to shut our pools down 3 hours after we finish operation and then restart the filtration. Excuse me, I said shut down the pools, but shut down the filtration 3 hours after the public has exited the pools, and restart that filtration 3 hours before the public comes back in the pools. We have facilities that have a large number of pumps. It's a significant energy savings, and based upon 2 years of experience, we can say definitively that in no case we put our guest at risk. What I would say to Michael is he's absolutely right that this does not apply to the high-risk pools because of the issue related to cryptosporidium.
Okay, so, and I agree with that last point as well, Michael, so just so you know. So CR 77, this is about? So Richard Falk, again, sorry. CR 77. So my understanding is this is similar to the DIN 19643 standard proposal that, and that's what's done in Europe. I'm not sure if Canada calls it the same. But I'm in agreement with the rejection of it from a practical point of view. But I think the discussion should be opened up in terms of, the broader of what chlorine levels are really needed and how to achieve these goals and so on, and what's trying to be done in terms of reducing disinfection byproducts. The practical reasons that it doesn't make as much sense in this country is because of the way the pools are designed. And in Europe, they're much more, you need a lot of very good circulation if you're going to try to maintain 0.2, 0.3, 0.4 part per million in a pool, because it's got to really distribute the chlorine everywhere. You don't have cyanuric acid to buffer it and so on in terms of the chlorine levels. You have to have, the filtration can't be this high rate sand that's blowing through, and because there's coagulation, and filtration is a really key part of the system. You can't have, depending on which system they're using, I'm not sure about Canada, but in Europe, there also is activated carbon that's used as well for removing disinfection byproducts. Organics precursors, but it's also removing chlorine, and you have to add chlorine after the fact. So there's whole economics that go on. And so it's a good system for what it does. It's not inexpensive. There may be elements of that could be considered, but I agree with as far as, we can't just switch to it. There's also the EPA considerations and other things that would have to change to broaden it. But I would like the mindset to be opened up as far as considering, well, what works in that system and why, and then what parts might be able to be migrated or used longer term in what we're doing here. Okay, that was it.
Michael Beach, CDC, 77. I'm going to reiterate what Richard said, is that I do think that we want to consider in the future that aspirational goals and aspirational operation is not necessarily a bad thing. It's going to be expensive, and so rewarding the groups that do put it in. This was passed in Alberta, and there are several pools built like this, but I'm sure they were not cheap to get to those water quality parameters. But I think it does give an opportunity for us to show what we can do if we want to invest the new technology and that sort of thing into it. So it certainly would be great to consider for the future these sorts of things. I know there's an issue with EPA. We definitely need to talk to them about this interpretation of a lower level. I think needs to be discussed on labels, because obviously the upper label is one thing. It's now kind of pseudo regulation of pool environments for the lower level, I think, and to some extent. So we need to talk to EPA about that. But let's keep our minds open for some of these things. I know that with this is Gerhard Weiss, the Weiss that put this in. I think it's ultrafiltration that's being used on this pool, and so it can be done. And should we give some benefit for somebody who wants to invest and do this and be a demonstration type project as a consideration at least? Thanks.
CDC. I just have a clarification point regarding the electrical code comment and to a couple of the comments that were brought up. In the Model Aquatic Health Code, it specifically does not it references the National Electric Code and other electric codes and does not provide relief from those codes, and the MAC should not conflict with the National Electric Code. So I would consider we need to be having a conversation around what the electrical code says in that regard. So I just want to make that clear that we do not conflict or provide relief from those other codes.
Since you're up, Jason, do you have any comments from online? No. Okay. Are there any other comments from the floor? Seeing none, we'll move on to Section 7. And the first item there is CR 78 to be presented from the Technical Review Committee.
All right, on CR 78, in summary, on maximum free available chlorine levels, which are currently 10 parts per million, suggested add wording about levels in manufacturer's label and must use the lowest level. So basically, people are always reminded to read the safety labels on their chemicals. In some cases, 10 parts per million is much higher than manufacturers recommend, leaving the operator not knowing what to follow. The TRC did not recommend accepting this change. TRC noted that the requirement to follow label directions is certainly critical, but it's already covered in the Model Aquatic Health Code in Section 573114 It states that free available chlorine concentrations shall be consistent with the label instructions. As we know, the EPA also regulates the labeling and use of the pesticides in the U.S., including chlorine. And then Annex 573115 also includes discussion on the maximum chlorine levels and the EPA regulations. So TRC felt that we were well covered, specifically within Section 5, to cover this.
Thank you, Carl. The next item is CR 79 from Doug Sackett, please.
CR 79 is about setting a maximum level for bromine, which was missing in the MAC. We had a number of inquiries since the adoption of the printing of the MAC in August of 2014 that there was an absence of an upper limit. So the proposal is to establish a maximum 8 parts per million, and that's based on the U.S. EPA, their Office of Pesticides, and they register products. And right now, the use levels that are ranging from 1 to 8 parts per million. So it was absent of no upper limit. The fact that they are currently registering products up to 8 parts per million, that's the basis for establishing the upper 8 part per million for the time being. So we modified the maximum level to include that, and then modified the discussion in the annex where we did. For the initial version, said that we welcome input and supporting data. We are now deferring to the EPA. Those listings of 1 to 8 ppm is the basis for the upper limit. Thanks.
TRC comments?
For reasons of consistency with the EPA, the TRC recommends adopting this change that the bromine levels would be added to be a maximum of 8 parts per billion.
Thank you. The next item is CR 88.
On CR 88, the author suggested to delete the need for water quality sampling locations and recommend that they be taken at a common location for baseline purposes and comparison throughout the day and cross days. The author lobbied saying that if you're testing for circulation, I'd agree. If the intent is to see if a pool disinfectant levels are dropping throughout the day, then you need a constant baseline to go off of. Circulation should already know with spot tests and flow meter documentation stated in the code. The TRC did not agree with the author on this item. The rationale and discussions were that your baseline point should be the chemical controller in the system throughout the day, but so that's your point of consistency and comparison. But it's important that samples are taken throughout the pool at the shallow end, at the deep end, because you're going to have different beta loads, different beta load concentrations, and to ensure that there is sufficient residual throughout the pool in shallow ends, deep ends is critically important. So therefore, TRC recommended a no vote on this item.
Thank you. The next item is CR 89.
All right, the author of CR 89 recommended the action level for combined chlorine within natatorium from 0.4 parts per million to 1 part per million. The author, should back up, had substantiated their change request, stating that their personal history, and this is coming from an operator, shows it will not be able to maintain this level because of the approved facility design, or when the approved facility design was constructed. And I think this is just kind of emblematic of kind of the larger issue that we're battling out there with chloramines and indoor air quality, especially at existing facilities. So the TRC on this item, similar to the last, recommended that a no vote be taken. The author does not provide justification, most importantly, or data to support the change from 0.4 parts per million to 1 part per million. This standard is not retroactive. It only applies to new construction moving forward, and these parameters can be met through proper design. And it should be noted, too, that the 0.4 parts per million, as was noted in the summary, and I think maybe the author had missed this point, it is an action level. So at that point, when you've got combined chlorine that reaches 0.4 parts per million, the facility operators would need to take action to reduce the combined chlorine. It's not necessarily means that the facility be shut down. There's DIN and WHO standards are 0.2 parts per million. For reference, and that health effects can be experienced at levels beyond 0.2 parts per million.
Thank you, Carl. I'll open the floor for comment. Dr. Beach, and then you got here first.
I'm fastest to the thing. I told you that's what it's about. It's who gets fastest. Here, just wanted, this Michael Beach, CDC, CR 89, just to clarify that this actually, Carl said about new construction, this is actually an operational one. It's in Section 5, so it does apply to everyone. It is an action level, not a regulatory level. And just to point out why that was done in the MAC, so that people understand, it's that our current testing gives a combined chlorine level. It doesn't differentiate volatiles, which are causing a lot of the issues we're talking about, from organic chloramine lump in there that you can't get rid of the same way. And so we can see people aren't able to do it, and it's more an indicator of they haven't dumped their water recently versus that there's lots of volatiles in there. And so until we have reasonable testing to be able to differentiate there and guide how we're going to move forward, it was set as an action level. And so I just wanted to point that out to folks.
Steve Dunn, Commercial Pool Systems. And my comment is regarding CR number 78 and CR number 79. So in CR 78, we say that the EPA has got levels for 4 parts per million for pools and 5 parts per million for spas for chlorine. But yet on the back side, we're saying, okay, we're going to have 10 parts per million, and so recommendation is not to accept the change to the EPA. But yet on 79, when we come to bromine, we say that we are going to, the recommendation is to accept CR 79, which is to make it agree with the EPA of bromine levels not greater than 8 parts per million. So my question is, why are we following or recommending that we go with the EPA recommendation on one, or levels on one, and yet on the other one we're recommending not to follow the EPA?
Tom Lachaki with the National Swimming Pool Foundation. What Steve said, it seems inconsistent to be able to put in explicit requirements for bromine that is consistent with the EPA registered label, and then to allow a higher level with chlorine. I think we should be consistent one way or another, so that if one's wrong, we could fix both of them later. But it seems like being consistent with the EPA is the way to go.
Just a clarification on the chlorine versus bromine on EPA. With the chlorine, they've apparently established the levels. The difference with bromine, these aren't not established levels. These are levels that they've been tested, products tested at this range. So there's quite a difference on that. And again, it's not perfect, but when we're looking at establishing an upper level at the request of the folks out there, it's the closest we have to defend a number is they have to be listed, and here's the range that they were listed at by EPA. And I don't know, I've consulted with Roy Vore on working this out, so I would welcome Roy, if he can clarify this anymore, to come up and maybe do better justice to the explanation. But because several people have picked this up and pointed that out. So.
No, why don't we just go in order? Let's keep going. Thank you.
Michael Beach, CDC, just to CR 88 about fixed points in the pool and that sort of thing. I do want to point out that part of the problem that we see during outbreak investigations is an over-reliance on fixed points for testing. And so if you've got a bad testing point that is high compared to the rest of the pool, you keep seeing this. We see this in drinking water systems and in pools, that people over-rely on the same location. They really need to move this around so they make sure that the pool is circulating appropriately. As Carl said, there's a fixed point, that's back in the pump room, and there's a point out in the pool to make sure everything's okay there. And we see that people miss that a lot of times, and all of a sudden you've got a pool that's essentially out of chlorine and nobody quite knows why. It's because of this over-reliance on inappropriate testing points.
Looks like Richard yielded to Roy, so.
I'm Roy Vore from BioLab. The situation on the bromine is exactly as Doug was explaining. The EPA years ago established a level of 1 to 3 originally and adjusted it to 1 to 4 ppm. So all products registered with the EPA automatically have a 1 to 4 ppm for chlorine. On bromine, there is no guidance policy, so the manufacturers submit their own performance data, put it in there and say, we believe this product works from this range to this range. And so the labels on bromine range anywhere from about 2 ppm to 8 ppm. So the 8 ppm maximum covers all products on the currently registered with EPA. Some are going to have lower, some are going to have higher. But the real problem is EPA did not produce an overall guidance document.
Richard?
Richard Falk, CR 78. So a lot of this will get covered tomorrow morning's session because there's issues with the chlorine cyanuric acid relationship this relates to, as far as why is it so high, 10 parts per million for chlorine. So the reason Florida has 10 and Texas has 8 and some other states and so on in their codes have such high free chlorine concentrations as the maximum is it's not when there's no, it's not for no cyanuric acid. They don't say that in the code, but that's what really the reasoning was. When there's cyanuric acid in the water, it significantly moderates the chlorine strength, and it's related to the free chlorine cyanuric acid ratio actually. And so that's why that's there. But there is the problem of the EPA, because the EPA has this 4 ppm limit, and there's a contradiction. The right way to fix this is to get the EPA to understand the chlorine cyanuric acid relationship, both on for the high end part with respect to the high end of the free chlorine number, and then the same thing when there's no cyanuric acid in terms of the low number, like the Gerhard, Weiss proposal or whatever his name was, that part too. The EPA just needs to understand it, because they did the DIS TSS 12 standards around the same time the cyanuric acid was just coming around and some of the science was coming around and such. So they really ignored that part. So that's the right thing to do. I mean, whether that's done or not, but I think we should pursue that. And I have a separate point, but it's a separate CR.
Come on up.
Tom Kiekler, Occidental Chemicals, CR 78 and 79, chlorine and bromine. Roy was correct. Most of the chlorine products are 1 to 4 parts per million as chlorine, measured as chlorine. Bromine are generally 2 to 8 measured as bromine, and I think probably 79 ought to mention that's part per million as bromine. But the conversion factor is a molecular weight conversion, and it's basically a factor of 2, and so 2 to 8 for bromine is essentially the same as 1 to 4 for chlorine, and so if you wanted the 2 to be consistent, that's why the numbers are what they are.
Just, I guess, a point of context, too, for the upper limits of whether it be 10 ppm for chlorine or 8 parts per million bromine. The effect is, we're not suggesting you operate at that level, but as a regulator coming in to inspect the pool or an operator operating a pool, technically, if you're exceeding whatever that upper threshold, means the pool closes down until you're in compliance. So if 4 parts per million chlorine is the upper limit, that if you're over 4 parts per million, you're out of compliance and shouldn't be operating. Similarly, with bromine, I guess the reverse would be with no upper limit, you can go out there and be at 30 parts per million bromine and you're okay. There's got to be, limits. But I just wanted to point out that, the practical application of an upper limit, particularly with a chlorine, could be problematic. Is it health-based at 10 parts per million? Is there a problem with, as long as you can accurately measure it, is there a problem with operating a pool, a health risk at that? From everything we've seen, no. So I just want to put that in the context and perspective.
Okay, Richard Falk, CR 89. Just to make the comment that not all combined chlorine is the same, and there's, I think, research agendas to help try to get test kits to do it better, because you can have high combined chlorine and not have a problem. You can have smaller, so not really small, but lowish, and have a problem because nitrogen trichloride takes 20 parts per billion before that's detectable. But you got chlorourea in there, and you can have that quite high, and you got monochloramine in your fill water at 1 ppm or higher for a lot of municipal water districts, and it's not as much by itself. It's not an issue. So it's fine to keep the code the way it is, but we should just keep in mind combined chlorine is not the single chemical it's measuring, and it really needs to be done better as far as managing that.
Tom Lachaki, NSPF. The philosophies that we've had in the past that if this much chlorine's fine, that much is better. The body of evidence is growing that that's no longer the case. Having upper limits are a good thing. Is there an acute risk of a 10 ppm chlorine? I've never seen any evidence to that case. However, the body of evidence about increasing potential, not necessarily absolute, but potential chronic risk of people at high chlorine levels, there is a growing body of evidence. And of course, the scientists that are speaking at the World Aquatic Health Conference and have published on this are building a body of evidence to make sure that there are upper limits placed on that. And if we can move toward operations that has a tighter range and we're more efficient, that's going to be a good thing.
Thank you, Bob Vincent in Florida. Same one, chlorine. When you look at the drinking water standards, there's a standard of 4 parts per million chlorine average, so that drinking water systems cannot put more than 4 parts per million in on average. And so that allows a wide range during the day. There's a minimum residual in many states of 0.2 parts per million chlorine, and that allows a wider range during that day. What we saw, and the reason we set it at 10 as a max before EPA set it at a 4 on the label, and many of the manufacturers set it at 4, is because we saw a lot of them start out in the morning with 10, and by the end of the day, the afternoon, with heavy load and heavy sun and all the other chlorine demand items that are in place, they would be down to 1, and 1 is our limit. They had to do that in order to keep up with that. We also require a 6 ppm dose on the chlorinator, and we require for slides and other agitated waters a 12 ppm dose. So even though it's going in at that, it's being consumed fairly quickly. But again, that drinking water average has been out there now in the Safe Drinking Water Act for a number of years, and I think that's a piece of this puzzle.
Any other floor comments? Online comments? Jason?
One comment regarding CR 79, setting the maximum level for bromine, 8 parts per million. Bromine is evaluated as a sanitizer while combined chlorine is evaluated as an irritant, could explain the inconsistency. And if you're following the chatting, there was something that came in on the CYA limits. We will save that comment for tomorrow morning when that is discussed.
My work here is done.
Yes. Can we? Everybody has been on time today pretty much, so we didn't get to really use that, and it was so much fun. Okay, we are really early, so we are going to adjust on the fly here, which is we don't want you to have to come back tonight. So caucus now, and then basically for an hour, and then you don't have to come back tonight. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay, we get full support on this. So you know where the rooms are? A, B, and C, Las Palmas, and Grand E, caucus and discuss things. And again, have a really great evening. Thank you for our sponsors, and we will see you here tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Is this room going to be locked? I mean, right now? We'll be able to get back in, I think, but it probably will be. Yeah. I would not leave your electronics and everything in this room relying on security here. Please take your computer, and I will take mine if it's not already gone. Thank you.